What a fabulous last panel. Thank you to everyone who was part of that. Okay. All right. And hello to everyone at home. It's nice to see you. Okay. How do I start? How do I start? Okay. Okay. So we are moving on to our second panel for the day, which is a different feeling and flavor. We're talking about SAJ as society or community. So I'll share some brief reflections, and then we'll begin with our illustrious, wonderful group of folks in front of me, or to the right of me, left, yeah, right of me. One of Mordecai Kaplan's most ubiquitous and impactful teachings in the world is the idea that Judaism is an evolving religious civilization. While others at the time cast Judaism simply as a religion or an ethnicity, as we've talked about, Kaplan insisted, and I quote in Judaism as a Civilization, he said, "No single Jewish activity or interest can serve the whole of Judaism." His view was of a Judaism that was organic, complex, that had many component parts, including history, ritual, laws, arts and culture, language, literature, and as Mel Skolt spoke so beautifully about earlier, ethics. Kaplan's understanding of Judaism as a civilization has powerful implications of not only how we view our tradition writ large, but also potentially how we organize our Jewish communities. Often, or probably primarily, synagogues are organized or have been organized historically as houses of worship on the one hand, and as schools in which we educate the youngest members of our faith. This really, in many ways, is a model that was created in 19th century Germany as an imitation of the Protestant model of worship. And in some ways, really doesn't reflect a very Jewish point of view at all. And so Kaplan's understanding of Jewish history and Jewish life also really has these incredible implications in some ways to bring synagogue life more back to an essentially Jewish modality, moving away from that reformer, positive assimilationist model that started with the Reform movement. Yeah, that's fine. Thanks. Okay, thank you. Oops, thanks. Thanks, Aiden. So this approach to Jewish life also, I think, does something else. It doesn't just speak about Judaism, but as of doing things, one modality. We all have varied interests. And if our congregational life is more of a civilizational approach, is more of a societal approach, then we're going to be able to reach more people in the ways that they want to be part of Jewish life. This has been a big part of the way that I approach my rabbinate since 2006, or even earlier, since I graduated from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. I was part of the founding, or I was the founder of a synagogue in West Philadelphia. We started with services once a month, and then we also explored with Chavarot and social action and education, adult education, adult learning, as a way to not just say that everything has to be centered around the prayer life as the only part. And then at SAJ, after being here for a year, I put together a vision statement for the next 5 years of SAJ, which many of the SAJ members remember, which was an ambitious plan to be the best version of ourselves, and particularly in some ways by expanding in the areas outside of prayer to, of course, increase our ruach and our music, but also to add happy hour Shabbats, or that types of activities, arts festivals, adult learning for people newer to Judaism, more Shabbat dinners, and a significant amount of community building within our Hebrew school and teen community. So we always have more work to do, but nothing makes me more proud of a Shabbat morning, and this is particularly pre-pandemic, but thankfully it's coming back to our life, when we have a group of people praying in the sanctuary, another group of people with the intern doing a class on prayer or theology, children in every corner of the building, some parents hanging out in the balcony, knitting and chatting with each other, and then some parents going out for a jog, and then everyone coming back together for Kiddush. And I want to say that I think that Kiddush is a holy act, because that is when our entire community comes together just to schmooze or to play chess. And I'm so proud that people come, whether they come to shul or not, they feel like they have an equal stake in being part of our community. And that's something that over and over again I hear, especially from the less often shul going people in our community, how much they feel at home, even though they're not necessarily regular attendees at synagogue. And I'm also proud that we continue on after lunch with amazing programming with Debbie Rand, Nigunim, Parsha study with our intern, and Makom Shabbaton, our innovative program for younger students. So there is also a joke, and this is the last thing, and then I'll bring us to our group. There's a joke favored by rabbis, and it's a joke about an atheist who comes to shul every week, and when asked why he goes to shul, he says, well, Ginsburg goes to shul to talk to God, and I go to shul to talk to Ginsburg. And that's the kind of, that to a crass extent, to a better extent is the Kaplanian model, but that's the kind of community we want to build where everyone feels like they have a stake and they have a place. So we're here today because Kaplan created the synagogue as a society and did not call it Beth David or whatever, Temple Mount Sinai. And we're here to talk about what does it mean to be a society, to be a community? What does it mean to have multiple aspects of congregational life, those kinds of arts and culture and things integrated in a way? What has it been like? And I just want to make a note to say that we have 100-year history of being a community, and things obviously have ebbed and changed, and we're not covering everything, cannot possibly, but we are going to hear from incredibly wonderful humans, teachers, and congregants to talk about this aspect of, about each one of them is here to talk about a different aspect of communal life and that kind of sense of civilizational model of our congregation. So first we're gonna have Rabbi Simcha Weintraub, which is amazing that you're here from Philadelphia. Recently retired, we switched places. You went to Philly, I went to New York, who's gonna talk as one of former education director of SAJ and talk about what is it like to integrate this idea, all these ideas in an educational model, especially at an early stage of the congregation's development. We have Herb Kaplan, who's here to talk about the choir and music and how that works together. Judy Marlowe to talk about food. Again, I just said Kiddush is holy, so food is holy. Dan Woods, our Tish program and adult learning, and Ruth Messenger to talk about social justice. And Ruth and Herb are among the longest standing members of SAJ, so they can talk about, many generations. So I think from here, we'll hear from Rabbi Weintraub. Oh, we need the microphone. Where is that? Oh, Nancy has it. Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
So each one is going to speak for a few minutes about their area, and then we'll have some cross pollination.
So I first have to disclose that this is an overwhelming event for me.
Can you hold it a little closer?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, yes. Though I've been to this building several times since I retired from as educational director in 1982, 40 years ago, when I try to gather the memories, and there really are profound memories, and the educational and programmatic experiments that we tried, and the wonderful and diverse souls that are in this room that joined to make SAJ a spiritual home for me, it's really very awe-inspiring, and it's really beyond words. So I want to thank you right away for this very moving opportunity to revisit and look back together. So I have just a few minutes to reflect on education on the SAJ school in my years, which was the late 70s and early 80s. I moved to New York City in 1975 after spending the summer in Paris studying sculpture and painting. I came to New York to become a famous sculptor. And the only definite thing in my life was a 7-hour-a-week teaching job, teaching fourth graders at the SAJ. John Ruskay, who was then the educational and executive director, and I won't say what the salary was, and Rabbi Miller were militantly certain that things had to change when it came to the school. The Hebrew school, or the religious school, was not working, and it was high time to reconstruct what they did and how. So we launched what you'd have to call the Reconstructionist Experiment. And I will lay it out using 4 X's: experience, expression, extension, and exploration. And for each one, I have a little paragraph or 2 from the Bible, that being Judaism as a civilization. So let me just say that Rabbi Miller, John, Judith Tuman, myself, and several other faculty members all agreed that where we had to start was with the experience of the child. On page 486 in Judaism as the Civilization, Kaplan wrote, "No whit less important than reckoning with the perpetuation of Jewish life and culture is to reckon with the well-being and growth of the individual child. The Jewish educative process must start with the actual experiences of the child as he lives them in the present, and lead him consistently to reorganize and reinterpret his experience, that he comes to identify his own good with the good of society. To achieve this end, the child must be given increasing control over his own experience, so that he himself will be able to shape it and direct it towards aims freely and intelligently chosen." It's an incredible statement. So when a child arrives to Hebrew school, or we didn't want to call it that, whether on a weekday afternoon or a Sunday morning, the first question has to be, "What's up?" or "How is school going?" Kids had to feel that they could bring their pride or their exhaustion, their doubts or their achievements, their complaints and aspirations. They basically had to be encouraged to bring themselves. But experience also means that they had to help shape what the class would do. They had to have a real voice in the direction of the class, the class community's activity. So for example, we might divide the group up early on in the hour to come up with a skit that illustrates an ethical issue that we're going to be touching on, or create a large mural of what a biblical story might look like. We're just giving the bare frame of the story. Or a midrashic answer to a midrashic question, like, what did Abraham tell Sarah about the Akedah? Did he say anything? And I just have to, this is a little arts and, what is this? This is a show, we wrote it up as Akedah, a midrash making experience, picture of a sculpture, a medieval sculpture of Abraham and Isaac. And I used to collect pictures of Abraham and Isaac. Anyway, this article, which was in the Melton Journal, talks about this making midrash with fourth graders, which is my favorite age. So this brings us now to the second X, which is expression. On pages 488 to 89, Kaplan writes, "It is necessary to change radically the very notion of what it is to constitute the educative process. If Jews rely solely upon Jewish schools to achieve these aims, they are bound to fail. In all modern theories of education, it is reiterated again and again that we respond much more readily to activity than to ideas." Kaplan continues, "Another truth which is continually emphasized is that education is not a process distinct from life in general, nor is it to be confined to the four walls of the schoolhouse. Education is the process of continuous growth, the result of present experience, which modifies and reconstructs all previous experience. The solution lies in altering completely the conception of the Jewish educative process, and in learning to regard formal classroom instruction as only one link in a chain of agencies which must be instrumental in transmitting the Jewish heritage." And later on, he writes about camp and art and dance and music and youth groups, etc. So we realized that this had great implications for our efforts. A major revolution that some of you remember were the fall and spring retreats, when we took the kids away for a creative Shabbat at a camp, usually on the lake, twice a year in November and May, and spent the 48 hours together eating, hanging out, praying, playing softball or gaga, singing, hanging out, and sharing stories. Also, both within the class and ultimately the whole community, we took to producing major theatrical endeavors in Hebrew. Some of you were involved in our productions of Jonah, Fiddler on the Roof, Wizard of Oz, or Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. In the room that was here, and the savage building we did to make an extended stage, and we took out pews. I don't know, we got away with murder. And Ricky Lulav Segal, I don't know if she's here, but she had an arts and crafts room where she developed an arts room as part of the Hebrew school, which was unusual back then. And we also regularly introduced songs in nigunim. And I remember once needing a nigun as I rounded the corner of Broadway in 86, coming from my apartment early Sunday morning, and I came up with one by the time I got to 32 West 86th Street, the school building. Okay, and I also want to include here, when it comes to expression, through the strong faculty meetings, which we called P-Soup, that stood for peer supervision, which were truly bonding festivals of sharing ideas for activities and approaches, we jointly developed a curriculum of units of study that each lasted roughly 6 weeks. So a certain grade would focus on Passover 1 year, and on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur the next year, not the same, all the holidays every year. Or a section of Genesis 1 year and of Shemot, Exodus the next. Or the shtetl 1 year and medieval Spain the next. So it was meant to be heavily experiential, and it was not a rigid, confined direction. And just to give you a quick example of this, when the second grade teacher was exploring the shtetl in Eastern Europe, she wanted the kids to sensorily understand what the extreme poverty was like. So she gave an assignment to make whatever they could make out of potatoes, and tons of potatoes, maybe with some onion, and sometimes they're given an egg or a small amount of milk or butter. And I married that teacher. The goal was not to be confined to conveying just a fund of information. It was what happened at the P-Soup meetings, the peer supervision meetings, is 2 teachers, usually 2, the first grade and the 6th, let's say, would present a proposed unit and get the creative input of Judith Tuman, myself, and the other great teachers on the faculty. And these monthly P-Soup meetings were very much like monthly support sessions, and they were very inspiring and creative, and really the faculty became a community that helped each other do what they were assigned to do. Okay, the third X is extension. And here I'll tell you what Kaplan writes. The field of the Jewish teacher's activity and influence must be enlarged, or there will soon be no teachers. If Jewish education is to prove its worth in this country, the scope of the Jewish teacher must be enlarged to include the home of the child he teaches. In fact, most of the influence he wishes to exert upon the child, he must learn to exert through the medium of the parent. The teacher should be the one to establish the point of contact between the moral and religious generalizations with the specific situations and occasions in which they should be embodied. He should be the pastor, he or she, the pastor to the families of the children in whom he has to inculcate the patterns of Jewish conduct. Very interesting. So many of the parents, and they were busy parents, wanted to join in and support the school's efforts, appreciating that for our work to have impact, the family and the home were really the true consumers the real center, the soil in which the kids were planted and nurtured. So what we did was we had thought-provoking parent-child interactive assignments. You couldn't do the assignment without your parent. We had resources for home celebration and inquiry. We gave adult-level readings on the subjects that we were studying with the kids, so that they could approach the material as adults and, you know, not the infantilization of like Hanukkah, et cetera. So all these and more were an important part of the experiment. And I guess that brings me to my fourth and final exploration or extrapolation. Kaplan wrote, "The danger is that the Jewish training might be altogether crowded out of the life of the Jewish child. The only way to prevent that danger is making the Jewish training so effective in enlarging the mental scope of the child's life, in socializing his attitude towards his fellow men," sorry for all the male, "in inculcating in him an appreciation of life's worth and sanctity, that parents will rejoice to have such training imparted to their children." So just as the grown-ups expect that the Devar Torah on Shabbat morning will convey a connection between the text and context, between the tradition and serious contemporary issues, the children needed and wanted for the stories, wisdom, and struggles to aid in their search for direction in their lived lives. And so every effort was made to investigate and address what was of concern for the kids and what spoke to these matters. And in the peer supervision, teachers could correct each other on what was on kids' minds. So what did the Joseph cycle say about family relationships and conflicts? What does kashrut mean for vegetarianism? Who is the ultimate authority if the Torah was written by human beings and God is not personal or judging us? Can I pray what I want, when I want, and how I want? What does Jewish tradition say about giving to homeless people, and on and on? So that's just a sketch of the why, what, and how of the early days of the educational revolution at the SAJ in the late 70s and early 80s, when I had the great privilege and the greatest pleasure of being educational director. Thank you for those times, and thank you for this time today.
Thank you so much. Thank you. We're gonna pass, thank you so much. That was really inspiring. Can you pass the mic to Herb Kaplan? You go next, Herb, to speak about music and your experience being in the choir and also choir director.
Thank you. Music has always played a major role at the SAJ, and I will speak about choir singing to the extent that I know all the old history, and I'll talk mainly about the history when I took over in the 1990s as choir director. As you may know, in the early days of the SAJ, probably the late 30s or 40s, Judith Kaplan Eisenstein formed a choir of congregants to add to the richness of the community's experience. I believe the choir sang during high holiday services, and I don't know if the choir sang during Shabbat services as well, but I think it was mainly the high holiday services. Sephora Yaxberger was SAJ choir director, I think in the 1950s and 60s. She was very, very accomplished. Sephora came to New York from Israel in 1950 and went on to found the Hebrew Art School of Music and Dance on the Upper West Side that we're all familiar with. Sephora employed a small choir of professionally trained singers at the SAJ, and I believe they performed during the high holidays, but I'm not sure if they performed beyond that, high holidays. As a way of personal background, I joined the SAJ in 1972, and remember that the synagogue had a choir at that time, and the synagogue has had a choir, I believe, from that time on. So I'm talking about the last 50 years for sure. We've had a choir in the 50 years that I've been involved with the SAJ. The choir was led by SAJ volunteer members in the 70s and early 80s, and then by two successive professionally trained choir directors thereafter. I sang in the choir under the two professional directors, beginning in the mid-1980s. And during this time, the choir sang during the high holidays and nothing more. I volunteered to take over the leadership of the choir in 1996 when the then professionally trained director informed the SAJ in June of that year that he had accepted a position at another synagogue as choir director, and that left us in a predicament. The choir had a significant presence performing during the high holidays, singing at least a dozen pieces during the days of Rosh Hashanah and a dozen more during Kol Nidre and Yom Kippur. Over the years, I personally had experience singing in some very fine choirs and choruses and observing some very excellent conductors. I had also had some prior experience leading small vocal ensembles in college and graduate school, but leading the SAJ choir and preparing the choir for the high holidays just a few months away would be a big challenge. My decision to step in was also based on the realization that it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to find a professional Jewish choir director for the high holidays on such short notice. Well, things worked out, and I remained the SAJ choir director for the next 9 years, for better or worse, George. I began by using much of the music that the choir was familiar with, and when I added new pieces, I had a penchant for music that I felt would be deeply moving to the congregation. I wanted the congregation to have a spiritual and emotional experience from the choir singing to the point where it might bring tears to people's eyes. And I was told that it did just so with some congregants. I found this music in 19th century composers like Lewandowski and Sulzer. We got through the high holidays in 1996 with positive response from the congregation and from Rabbi Julie Schoenfeld, who sent me a very warm note of appreciation. Because choir members expressed interest, and with the encouragement of the rabbi and the cantor, we learned several pieces for Shabbat services and performed 3 to 5 times a year during Shabbat services. Cantor Kornreich, who many of us will remember, viewed our main role as support for congregational singing. And the choir did that, but we also sang a few pieces that added to the Shabbat service experience. By the way, our occasional performing during Shabbat services was possible because I was a volunteer and not paid. So it didn't require any financial outlay by the synagogue. As the choir began singing during Shabbat services, we used these occasions to put on 15-minute performances in the social hall after Kiddush. This enabled the choir to do more singing and adding some non-liturgical music to our repertoire. The choir's participation in services was well received by the congregation. In fact, over the years, we received a number of requests from SAJ families for the choir to perform at services on the occasion of their child's bar and bat mitzvah. This pattern continued for the next 9 years as I was choir director. Under my leadership, the number of singers at any appearance totaled about 15. Our choir consisted of all non-professional singers. Most were SAJ members, but a few were musical friends from choruses I was in. I'm happy to say that a few of my musical friends eventually joined the SAJ community. During my year as director, the choir was invited to perform outside the synagogue on a number of occasions, and I'll go through some of these briefly. We were invited to perform at Sheer Joy, which is an annual choral festival of area synagogue choirs organized by the Cantors Association at JTS. We were invited to join other choirs and perform at Rodef Shalom's annual Hanukkah festival just down the road, 3 blocks. Rabbi Liz Bolton, who moderated a program here at the SAJ a few weeks ago, invited our choir to be the choir in residence at a program at B'nai Keshet in Montclair, New Jersey, on the richness of Jewish choral music. Cantor Benji Ellen Schiller of Bet Am Shalom in White Plains invited our choir, along with 3 other Reconstructionist synagogue choirs, to perform at a musical event at their synagogue. We were invited to perform along with a few African American choirs at the annual Martin Luther King Day musical celebration at Symphony Space. And finally, the SAJ choir performed at St. Mary's Episcopal Church in Harlem. The invitation was given to us after the SAJ hosted the church's gospel choir right here as part of an Upper Manhattan Together initiative that the SAJ was part of. So in summary, the SAJ choir was very active in the synagogue and beyond during my 9-year tenure. I feel we carried on the tradition of offering fine music that enriched our services and served the community in multiple ways. In general, I think that choir singing adds a unique dimension to services. We experienced this during my tenure, and we experience it today as well with choir director Ben Gruder. The choice of choir music can vary depending on the preferences of the rabbi, the cantor, and the choir director. Music can be spiritual, it can be lively, it can be familiar and participatory. It can keep congregants from dozing off during long high holiday services. Fortunately, the repertoire of Jewish choir music, liturgical and otherwise, is extensive. During my time, we chose music from the Renaissance period in the 16th century all the way to the modern period, with pieces composed in recent years. So in closing, it's my hope that our musical tradition and the presence of a choir will continue at the SAJ. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you. So I don't know if it matters. The mic is, you'd rather go Judy? Okay, sure. Let's have Judy. Sort of historically, I think, yeah, Judy got.
Can you hear? Yes, okay. I'm in between weddings today, so you'll forgive me. I had to write down what I wanted to say because I was afraid I was going to forget. And I was a member of SAJ in 1975, and I can't believe how many years it's been. And it's had a profound influence on me. And talk about the organic experience. I mean, I got on a committee and ended up with a catering company. So it's like, you know, you can go anywhere here. But I'm going to read because it's just going to be easier for me. So bear with me. When I was asked to participate in this symposium today to talk about food, even though I'm in the food business, I said to myself, I don't really do food. I create events where food is an element of the whole, a part of an environment where people come together, experience on a community level, a common celebration, whether it's 2 people having dinner or a large celebration of a life cycle event. Then they move on, taking with them their memories. And it's really the word memories that's really the essence of what food is about in terms of community and SAJ and everything else in Jewish life. As I thought about it more, my catering business began at SAJ in the early 1980s. And what I've done all these years has really been a reflection of what the institution is about, expressed in the context of a food business. The Reconstructionist idea, as it evolved at the SAJ, is about bringing multiple aspects of congregational culture together to form an intellectual, but also an emotional experience as a community. I thought about it further, and 2 things came to mind. One was Rabbi Alan Miller's profound influence on my thinking as a Jew. As provocative and difficult as he had quite a mind. And how that had evolved into my actually going into my business and my work. The other was remembering a wonderful experience I had at this institution in 1985 when I was honored as a Kalat Bereshit. The tradition at that time, and I'm not sure what you do these days, was 2 honorees, the Kala and the Kalat, gave a speech at the celebration to talk about how the SAJ had affected and influence them in their Jewish lives. So if you will indulge me, I lifted a part of the speech that I gave here in the social hall upstairs on October 12th, 1985. I'm quoting myself now. After this year's Hoshana Rabbah breakfast, there was a study session in which some of the discussion centered on the Jews' reaction to being in Egypt and their wanderings afterwards in the desert. Rabbi Miller talked about the concept of aesthetics in Judaism and how the Egyptians needed to build permanent, heavily adorned edifices that were to last forever in order to give them the sense that they as a people would last forever. This was something Jews rebelled against. The whole idea of building portable sukkahs, of having portable tents in the desert, of non-everlasting edifices that were not aesthetic in approach, while necessary as part of their wanderings, stayed with them and was purposely retained as a response to the Egyptians. Rabbi Miller also mentioned that Jewish aesthetics eventually were expressed by making beautiful the sacred ceremonial objects, the Torah, its cover, the silver decoration that dressed the Torah, the pointer, the yad, when reading the sacred text, the Kiddush cup, the Hanukkah, and so on. It was considered a mitzvah to express aesthetics through the beautification of the ritual objects. I got to thinking about this because aesthetics, good design, a beautiful environment, a balance of space and form, and the objects and people within that space has always been important to me, as my background in design has demanded since I was a child. All of the projects I have been involved with at SAJ have encompassed aesthetics in some way or another, through the foods relating to specific holiday seasons, to creating the environment to make these meals a beautiful experience, where the meaning of the holiday was expanded from intellectual rituals to emotional and sensual experiences, the smells, the tastes, the sounds of a holiday or life cycle event, coming together with the intellect to create a balanced whole and a memory that could not be forgotten. I could never understand the relationship of aesthetics to Judaism before. In my experience, Jews were either concerned with separateness and distinctiveness and unconcerned with aesthetics, or they were only concerned with aesthetics and how to impress, unconnected to any depth of Jewish meaning beyond the material. The idea of expanding the mitzvah to aesthetics that had meaning makes the environment for celebrating Jewish lifestyle events as sacred as the ritual objects of beauty. That's the last part I'm reading of that speech. From the beginning in the 1980s to this day, this is how I approach all my events, which includes menus, of course, and all other aspects of celebration through food that are part of Jewish events and home life in general. When food and drink are expressed as a quality of ritual aesthetics, they create a feeling and a memory which is indelible, even though their origination and lifespan are as fleeting as the portable tents and non-everlasting experience of the Jews in the desert as they left Egypt. It is the experience of this pop-up shop, if you will, that is part of the fabric of Jewish history, yet remains a major aspect both of our daily lives and as part of our life cycle events. The approach to food and experiences that involve food have to have meaning and an emotional response. Otherwise, humanity is not involved. When I speak to clients about their celebrations, which always involve food among other multitudes of things, I always approach it from this idea that the celebration is the same as a beautiful ritual object to be admired, experienced, tasted, savored. And yet the environment it's going to happen in is fleeting. It's not permanent, except as part of our memories. And those memories must be meaningful. The idea for this for me personally came from this institution, its ideas, its values, its communal life of connection. And I believe it's sorely needed right now more than ever when so much of what we experience today is disconnecting and so challenging. I am as grateful for the SAJ today as I was 37 years ago, as it impacted my life. But in turn, because of its effect on me personally, I have been able, like the ripples in water, to give this experience to others through my work. That is the essence of communal experience, when what one feels and takes away personally ripples out to become part of an integral part of the community as a whole. Thank you so much for having me today. It was really an honor to be asked to come back, and I appreciate it.
Okay. I was hoping to accept the challenge of going after Ruth Messenger. I mean, I don't want anybody to think I'm a sissy. I was willing to do it. Anyway, Eden, do you have those slides? I have some slides. My name is Dan Woods. With Shel Schiffman, I organized the Tisch here. And I want to use this opportunity as an example to imitate Mel Skult, because I don't believe he talks about Reconstructionism. He preaches Reconstructionism. And so today I'm going to preach about the Tisch. And so to me, the Tisch is an engine for building our community. And, you know, the primary beneficiary are the people who most come to the Tisches and who most participate them. And for example, would everyone who's led a Tisch please raise your hand? Look at that, massive amounts of participation. And all these people are here, and I'm sure many people are online as well. So let's go to the next slide. To me, the idea of the Tisch is just a way to implement Kaplan's 13 wants. And you know, here's a selection of Kaplan's 13 wants, many of which were supported by the other activities mentioned here. But you know, the one that I like the best is the one we want Judaism to find rich, manifold, and extensive, ever new expression in philosophy, letters, and the arts. And I think,
Can I just, for anyone who does not know what the Tisch is.
oh no, we'll get to that.
Oh, you will.
We'll get
Okay,
to that.
fine.
We'll get to that.
Okay, fine.
So the Tisch does many of these 13 wants. And so now let's go into more exactly what the Tisch is. Next slide. Okay, the Tisch program is a weekly program in which we present some part of Jewish learning. Sometimes it's connected to the Parsha, sometimes it's not. Usually, it's almost always led by a SAJ member, and they are often presented as part of celebrations by people of the bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah, or some other celebration. And the Tisch calendar, if you ever want to see it, lives at saj.nyc/Tisch. And you can see it at any time of day or night. So now let's go to the next slide. The facts about the Tisch, it takes place on 9 a.m. in Shabbat morning, usually about 30 minutes. The program does not run in July and August. It was started by Rabbi Julie Schoenfeld to increase attendance at the start of services. Past Tisch organizers include Larry Zelnick, who I know is online, and Howard Stevens, may his memory be for a blessing. I'm running it right now with Shel Schiffman as my partner. And in the post-pandemic era, the multi-access mode has really helped the Tisch. We've about doubled our attendance. Usually we have from 20 to 40 people attending, and about 25% are in person, although that number is rising. And for special events, we've had more than 60 and sometimes even up to 100 people. Again, sometimes 25% for big B mitzvah events. We've had actually 50 or 60 this year. So even in the pandemic, we've been able to do pretty well. So let's keep going. Now remember, if you'd like to present a Tisch, please send an email with your idea to tisch@saj.nyc. Spots are open now. And I know that some of you, Deborah Dashmore presented a Tisch, but Deborah Waxman also said that she would be willing to present a Tisch. And Michael Strassfeld, our Rabbi Emeritus, I don't believe I've ever seen him present a Tisch. I think that it's time for him to complete that, you know, the cycle of his Judaism. So in any event, let's keep going. So the idea, though, is that the Tisch, I think, really does do some special things. It helps us all understand each other. And it also expresses the unique individualism that we have to offer as Jews and as SAJ members. And Hugh Barron, I don't know if everybody remembers him, but he would deliver these incredible essays that he eventually collected into a book. He also wrote a book about the history of the stomach. I mean, he was an incredibly nerdy person, and we have a lecture in his honor. Malcolm Spector, my all-time favorite Tisch title, Martin Buber Kissed My Mother. It was an unbelievable Tisch about his mother's correspondence with the actual correspondence collected with Martin Buber, but it also covered the entire sweep of what life was like during that period, including a young woman who was in her 20s and diagnosed with cancer, and her entire family didn't tell her about it. it was just amazing the way that we learned about all sorts of different eras of the world. Ruth Messenger has done zillions of tishes on politics and activism. Nancy Lidmer does incredible deep dives. Diane Cole surveys authors. Shel Schiffman gives us access to biblical criticism that's not in English often. David Katz, and Linda Stern, the last tish this year will be a poetry tish by them. We have personal growth tishes. Marilyn Talal did an incredible literary tish about her experience teaching writing, but then eventually her experience using writing to kind of execute personal growth. It's all amazing. There's so many other. Irv Millman gave a tish about being a 19-year-old soldier in World War II. Jack Hoffinger did a tish on Jewish gangsters. And then we've had special guests, tisha by Deborah Dash Moore, Ted Merwin, Dan Cederbaum, David Kaufman. Oh, yeah. And then there's all the list of Tish All-Stars at the end is probably incomplete. But in what happens during all these tishes? Well, what happens is on the next slide. What happens is that we build a stronger community. And I think that in each tish we advance our Jewish learning. We get new ideas about our Jewish practice. We advance the aspects of Kaplan's 13 laws, but we also learn about each other's lives and Jewish journeys. And so, it's very special. It's very special, and it's the kind of thing that I became a member of this community by going to the Tish and getting to know all of you. You now know all about each other and about me, and it's just a wonderful thing. And I believe this is how our community actually becomes stronger. These are the neurons that connect us all together. And so the pandemic has been an immensely important thing that happened to us. It's doubled our attendance because people can now come to the Tish by not leaving their houses. But it requires maintenance of a far more advanced audiovisual infrastructure. And the lesson, I think, for our community and for many others is that, to enhance the modern digital multi-access world, communities like SAJ must build muscle as event producers, as content producers, and as marketers. And we've seen with Rabbi Lauren, the pandemic high holiday services. Well, these were virtuoso acts that happened through non-repeatable processes that were incredible, and we all were so we appreciated it so. But it can't be done that way every year, and the Tish can't be done in an ad hoc way every week. And so we need to we need to become a different community in order to support this and have a lot more capabilities that are institutionalized, not heroically created, than we do now. And then, remember, one more time, we can go from here to different ways of connecting. So one of the things people always say is, why don't we have the parents of the SAJ Hebrew school give tishes? Well, I would love that. I would love that. They do when they're bar mitzvahs, but the problem is that they are so busy. They're just, it's enough for them to get people to come here. The process of sharing this relevant knowledge can create connections in other ways too. The sharing through food, sharing through the music. We have to find other ways. The SAJ Racial Study, the Racial Justice Study and Activism Group is one incredible example. SOJAC is another example of people connecting to each other and sharing knowledge. And so I do believe we could get more parents involved. I do believe that there are all sorts of other communities we can get involved if we have a venue so that we can each share knowledge about them. And maybe it's not always the Tish, it could be the Tish quite a bit, but it doesn't have to always be the Tish. And so I think that, finding different ways, different nexuses that we can use to do that Tish process of building the community would be great. And then finally, remember, so telephone lines are open.
Okay, amazing. Thank you.
Dan, you've got to learn to be put a little bit more passion into your speaking. Work on that.
Thank you. So just to go back to the previous panel, like Herb, I guess, Deborah, I've been here through 5 rabbis when the Bima was there. And yet I'm not, full on the history of social action, social justice in the 100-year life of the synagogue, because there was lots that happened here before that time. I do want to say before I go on that Simcha Weintraub was my children's teacher, as was his wife, that I joined the synagogue in 1969 and stayed because of the quality of the education in the schools for my kids. So it's a chance to thank Simcha and Simcha, his wife. The constant discussion at our dinner table was, Simcha said, Simcha the boy or Simcha the girl? I want to add one educational piece that was actually, I was going to say, like in the history, when that was Rabbi Miller's bar and bat mitzvah class, which had the distinction, which was really just a wonderful innovation for the West Side, in which pre-bar and bat mitzvah students had to attend every Sunday for a year in a discussion group with the rabbi. And the nice element of it, which irritated many people, some of us in this room, was that parents had to attend and were not allowed to speak. But anyway, it had a signal impact on my kids. So as I said, there were what you call synagogue social action events before my time. Myra has actually researched some of those, and so has David Kaufman. When I joined, I would say that it was the social concerns. The good news was that the social concerns were here and present, and they were basically promoted by one woman, Ann Meyer of blessed memory. Ann Meyer was rooted in the notion of social concerns as opposed to social activism. She thought everybody should be concerned and they shouldn't do too much. And there was this whole question of which I think continues to this day, which is why I said I would be on this panel, which is, what is the difference between social concerns, social activism, social change, social justice? It's a continuum, and it's been represented here at various points and in various really powerful ways, but it's an area in which I think there is always and constantly room for change and room for growth. So one of my favorite interactions with Ann, both which turned out to be positive, but some people will remember that every year on Rosh Hashanah, Ann Meyer would say, and then the rabbi would, whoever was the rabbi would repeat, please bring your cans and jars for food on Kol Nidre night. And then I would stand up and say, please bring a check instead. And I just think that that symbolizes the issue that it's not a time to clean your pantries. It's a time to worry about people who don't have enough food in our community and do the most that you can for them. One of the more exciting things that happened that I think probably not a lot of people remember because not a lot of people were involved, but during the one of the spiraling moments of homelessness in New York City when Ed Koch was mayor, and everyone who's alive knows I didn't agree with Ed Koch on very much, but Ed Koch demanded that churches and synagogues and mosques provide shelter overnight. And those that had big enough spaces and big enough congregations to cover volunteer service did that. And many of us here served as nighttime monitors at Rodef. And then a place in which Ann Meyer was fantastic, the synagogues on the West Side and some of the churches got together and formed an organization which lasted for several years called Beyond Shelter. And it really, for me, symbolized what I'm talking about, which is that the issue was not just to provide beds, as dramatic as an interaction as that was for volunteers, for religious institutions and their leaders. The question was, why are people homeless? What else should the city be doing? And so Beyond Shelter was a serious social advocacy, social activism effort that organized people to do more and to take the next steps. And it's, for me, a real model of coming together to make change. We've had a lot of those since then. I want to do a shout out to Karen, who's not here, but I don't think, but maybe she's on the screen. But SAJ participated and continues to participate in Upper Manhattan Together. And for those of you who don't know what that is, I just want to say that it is a model of what I'm talking about. And it's precisely, therefore, not an entirely comfortable structure. I want to make that clear. It goes through a process, it picks an issue, and there's not lots and lots of independent choice. So the model here right now, thanks to Rabbi Lauren, I think there's a lot of independent choices how you want to work on your activism and do some of that connected to your religious institution. But I want to do a shout out for the alternate notion of saying, like, this is not an area in which we each get to make our own choice. When you write your own check, that's fine. But as an institution, pick the issue. We're going to work on immigration rights. We're going to work on voting rights, but we're going to do it all out. That's very hard for, it's a hard switch for people. And I wouldn't talk on this panel unless I had some provocative things to say. My favorite story about that, which I'll tell you very briefly, is during my tenure in American Jewish World Service, I spoke in lots and lots and lots and lots of American congregations. And so I got to learn a lot of different minhags of different congregations. And the one that impressed me the most was at Bethel in Sudbury, Massachusetts. The congregation, some members of the congregation form a tzedakah hevra every year, and they anonymously put in 1% of their gross income to a bank account. And then the bank tells them how much money they have to spend. And they spend the year debating which charity or a few charities they want to give the money from their tzedakah hevra. I raised that at one of the very few membership meetings at the SAJ that I ever came to, and I was booed out of the room by people who said they would make their own tzedakah choices. Thank you very much. And they weren't interested in my idea. So I just want to say that this is a continuum of how much of this is individual and how much of it is organizational. And the length of time that we have had at least some people participating with Upper Manhattan Together, I think is to our credit. But the situation that we have now, I think, is this really dramatic move toward a greater level of activism. Lots of different things going on, all of which were enumerated at the SOJAC luncheon, from people who are doing staffing, or whatever you want to call it, covering abortion clinics, to people who are writing postcards and letters through a variety of mechanisms to influence who gets to vote and whether they remember to vote, and occasionally who they vote for. So that those are all sort of changing and emerging efforts. But what's important now is that this has become, and I think the branded name of the SAJ makes that clear, that we are a home for people with lots of different social justice and social advocacy activities. And it's possible to bring it here. And the rabbi basically suggests that she's not going to do it for people, but that people can do it, and can do it under this roof and with this congregation. And a lot of it has caught on with a lot more people. And it does offer, for sure, its benefit is it allows people to pursue their area of particular interest and their level of activity and involvement. They will take postcards home. Thank you, Debbie Rand. They will do other kinds of things that they otherwise wouldn't have time for. And so I think these two models go back and forth. And I want to then do a shout out. The rabbi and I have tried. It would be better if we had a slightly larger group, but we've tried a couple of times to talk to people in ways that don't usually happen. I'm saying this related to my story about Massachusetts, to talk to people about their own practices of giving. So we actually taught a small class here about, I don't know, pre-pandemic, 5 years ago in tzedakah, and I would love to do that again. And then the rabbi inaugurated an effort by the Bar Mitzvah kids to, instead of each raising their own money for charity, have a meeting and have several classes and discuss possible charitable activities, and then agree as a group that the money that they got for their Bar Mitzvah would go to a shared charity. And I thought that process, we did it 2 years, was really important in talking to 12-year-olds about what they think and listening to them debate with each other about where their money should go. What was really powerful, and is the kind of ongoing thinking I'd like to see, both about spending money and about writing postcards and about taking physical action, but always thinking beyond the issue of social concern, beyond the very important elements of service, thinking to the advocacy and justice questions and what are the things that we need to change. And anybody who's been around this week knows that there are a lot of things we need to change. And some of that is happening inside the walls of the synagogue or by the members of this synagogue outside its walls. And I would like to see more of it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ruth. And let's just give a big hand for all five. That was amazing. I think what's really powerful is to see the way an institution can change lives. That's why we do this, right? Being a rabbi, running an organization, running a Jewish institution, Joy Levitt right there, is really difficult. And we do this because we know that the work we do can change lives. We don't always get to see it and hear it. So to hear the way that your life changed, Dan, you don't need to say it. It's there, and Herb and Ruth as well.
I forgot the shout out for the social justice, racial justice and activism series of tissues, which connected to Dan and connected to several people here and is still ongoing.
Yeah,
So
thank you. I mean, we could be here for hours listing all the things happening, which we really, we've been doing. So I guess what I wanted to ask is and actually Rabbi Weintraub brought this up when we met individually, or we met as a group to plan the panel. What's the role of the individual? What's the role of the community? How do they go together hand in hand in building this kind of institution that has the power to impact people in the ways that you're describing? Is it, the ability to get involved? Is it, tell me more about that, I guess. Anyone want to speak to that? The sort of how their individual journey ties in with the journey of the congregation, or maybe anyone in the audience also.
Well, I'll just throw one thing into it. Since
Sure.
You pointed it. In my senior year of high school, I'm so sorry. In my senior year of high school, my father, who was a rabbi of a suburban conservative congregation outside Washington, decided to have two scholars in residence weekends. And one of the scholars in residence was Zalman Schachter, Rabbi Zalman Shalomi Schachter, and the other was Rabbi Alan Miller. And it was just mind-blowing, because it was like having Kaplan and Heschel, or one of these dyads that have your left brain working and then your right brain working, and then trying to negotiate between them. Anyway, what I just have, I never paid my dues here, although I think I paid my dues.
You paid your dues
in other ways, but so I wasn't a member, but I felt so much that I was able to bring myself, and that's why I put it in my talk with the kids about bringing yourself. That's the way that you both build community and also teach kids about the image of God. That Stevie Greenhouse, or whoever the little kid is, matters so much to the community. And so when Judy talks, or when Dan talks, it just, or Herb and Ruth, it's about that. It's about the components being recognized and having their name matter in the community. So that's one thing that I think, the worst thing is to join a community and get lost in it, or to be overwhelmed by it. And I think there was the open mic, those of you that remember the open mic.
We still do that.
You still do that?
Most of the time.
Oh, so okay. So it didn't die. Okay, good. It was really, I mean, it was hard to manage at times, but you had a say on the parsha or whatever you needed to talk about. So I just want to point to that.
Yeah. Fun. Over there.
I mean, I think it's really what I spoke to. I think it is both a part of the notion that we've been talking about all afternoon, that was Kaplan's notion, that is a piece of the West Side, and that is that there should be more than just a prayer community. They should do all of these different things. And then for every individual, there's always the question of, like, do you do things that you do outside your synagogue? Do you also do them inside your synagogue? Do you do them alone or do them with other people? And I think when Dan talks about the Tish and the way in which it's brought a universe of people together, I think the same thing is true for the group of people who've done the racial justice classes. There are seven or eight of us, I can't remember. And because we did them over a year and met several times to talk about who would cover what and how it builds a different kind of community and understanding. And it's not, I think the challenge, Lauren, is it's not, there are lots and lots of places where that can happen in the world. And most of us here, not just us, most of us have 27 different places where those various activities are going on, where we go to hear music, where we go to enjoy food, where we go to talk to other people, where we invest time in our kids' education. And the question really is, how much of it do you want to do inside your synagogue, and how much of it can any one synagogue or congregation handle? Because unlike some much larger congregations, for example, some much larger congregations that I know of now have staff people who do the political organizing and social justice work. And doesn't mean that the congregants aren't doing it. It means that there's an organizational center, which we don't have, but we do have a lot of people that you can name who call for this or call for that. But it makes it a little more diffuse, maybe more robust in some ways, but a little less focused.
Yeah. Well, so we can open. Oh, great. We can open up. I saw Nancy first, and then Jonah.
Just speaking to two things that were brought up. I participated in some of the social justice activities here that I would not have done on my own, just out of fear or anxiety. And the one that most comes to mind is being an escort for an abortion clinic. And it's not something I've done a lot of. I mean, at times the program isn't always ongoing, but I felt so supported by the group that was doing it, and I felt able to do it. I think the postcard writing is something else that was really encouraged. And so again, I might not have done it on my own. I now am able to continue to do it more on my own, but it was because it was something generated here. And I want to just put in something relating to this, to the Tish program, is that I have done a few Tishes with someone else. I did a Tish with Kathy Jarko, where she talked about the art of a children's book writer, and I talked about the writing of the children's book writer. And it was the illustrator and writer of Caps for Sale, and it was so much fun. And it's a way, I just want to say Tishes, sometimes they can seem overwhelming. I did the SOJAC Tish this year with Danielle. Again, it's a way to foster community and also the way to foster one-on-one relationships.
And I think as Jonah's we get the mic to Jonah, the pandemic has been helpful because, okay, I hate the pandemic, so I don't want to ever say the pandemic is helpful, but the one positive part of the pandemic has been more intensive, smaller communities online that are meeting regularly, including the 8 a.m. Minion and many iterations of that. So, Jonah.
So I'm Jonah Mendelson. Thanks so much. It was good to hear you all. I'm a new member of SAJ. I've been coming around a little less than a year and just joined, my husband and I. And I've been thinking about Mel's talk and how do you square the tension between being here for self-improvement versus being part of a society, much less a unified society, when there's so many, we're all complicated. We all contain multitudes, and how do we get along and do that? What I'm hearing today, I think, is the roots of what works and is drawing me to SAJ. And it's what you talked about, Herb, as you came in and said, we have to listen to the children coming in. And each of you talked about listening to the individuals who are then part, and you're able to fold that individual experience into something that others can connect to. And that I find really moving and inspiring. This idea that, when we talk about we need to unify, there's often this sense of needing to silence the disagreement. And yet, even in social action where we need to move unified, it's that diversity of need that we have, that we bring to it, that fuels the act for change, whether it's something like ACT UP or the chaos that that is part of the energy of making change, that diversity. And so that's what I'm so touched by. Is the other thing I'll say is that what the people I hear who have stepped up to take on leadership roles and invite people into these things. In other synagogues I've been to, let's just say that a lot of people who get up there are eager for a platform to have their own point of view be heard. You know, the education leader who has their thing that they want to talk about, so that's why they volunteer. What I hear here is you all have your own interests, but you're genuinely curious about what other interests are out there. And that is something very special and makes for a very lively sense of belonging, that sense of listening. Jews who listen, who knew?
Thank you, Jonah, so much. Thank you. Danielle. Oh, actually, let's do Barbara first because the microphone situation. Thank you, Jonah.
Simcha, I just wanted to address when you reformulated the education program, you also educated adults. And George and I were beneficiaries of that. When we joined the synagogue, it was because our son Michael was 3 and he was in the nursery school. And Rabbi Miller said, do you speak Hebrew or read Hebrew? We said, no. He said, well, we don't come down to the lowest common denominator, which was a beautiful challenge. He said, you need to learn. Here's our teacher. Simcha taught us Hebrew. And he finally got us to do a Haftorah. We shared one. In 1977, my parents were still alive. They were there. And I think it was one of the most meaningful opportunities in our life. And he was on the phone every night the week before with us. He came for dinner a couple of times, but he got us through. And we've always been very grateful for that. And so, and I think you taught other adults. I think that the Segals, Ricky and Jeff, and a couple of other longtime members also had our adult B'nai Bat mitzvahs. And I think, and also I think talking about having the parents in the Bar Mitzvah class with the kids was another wonderful opportunity. We had to keep our mouths shut, yes, as Ruth was saying, but what my son Michael took from that experience was, he said, for the whole year, Rabbi Miller told us, we read the first book of Genesis, and we finally had to understand that it was written by 2 different people.
Yep.
So if the first book of Genesis was written by 2 different people, it couldn't have been God. So you draw your own conclusion.
Thanks. Okay, I'm sorry, George, we have like no time left. Is that okay?
Then we have
One more.
Can I switch subjects for just a second? To Herb, he's far too modest in his accomplishments. Not only is he a great musician, but he showed infinite patience with us. And I think without him, we would have been in great trouble to continue to perform. But not only did we continue, but we continued with excellence and meaningful spiritual moments that he created. Herb, could you tell us a little bit about what attracted you to the Ladino?
I can't, we
We don't have time for, I'm sorry, George. We would love to talk to you about that at a Tish.
Yes.
Dan Woods. We'd love that comment, right?
And
We're gonna do a
speaking of
Tish about-
Tishes,
Yes.
speaking of Tishes, I was going to say the tzedakah issue that you brought up, Ruth, would be a great topic for a Tish. I'm not paid to make these announcements, but I just wanted to mention that. The other thing I wanted to mention is Dan went through a whole bunch of people who've spoken at Tishes, and one of them was done by Irv Millman. And I just wanted to say a little bit more about that, only because it unifies everything that you've all been talking about. Is Irv was on a boat to go fight in World War II, and he was 19, and the chaplain on the boat had laid in all of the necessary items for Passover. And Irv was the youngest Jew on the boat, and he got to ask the 4 questions. And so since a lot of what Judaism is about is remembering, I just wanted to mention that so that we could all think about Irv for a minute.
And just to bring that piece to a close, I'm going to say, I feel like I know some of the people who I never got to meet because of the tishes that they led. Like, I never met Irv, I never met Hugh Barron, and I feel like I know them as well as others. So we also create, and we were talking about a 100-year institution and so many people. Naomi recently did a wonderful reflection of her memories and named individuals. I mean, think about every single person who made an impact on this community for 100 years. And that's why this space is so special, because whatever way the ark was oriented, whatever way the sanctuary was, we are including them in our community. It's part of also who we are, and we are stand on the shoulders of all those who brought everything to build up until this day and from going forward. So I think with that, thank you so much to these wonderful experts and areas. Passion, the love,